Here are some of the graphs that Marissa produced, which show us visually much better what the results of Gerda's tests are compared to the written report which we received. So the way these graphs work is as follows. This green level here is the level at which Gerda would have performed on these tests before her dementia. And they call this the pre-morbid level or a pre-morbid score. So this is the average score. So she, for each test, would have scored higher or lower than that mark, but that's the average. Then here is the average score that average people in the world would achieve on each of these scores. This average is in fact a range from 25 to 75 percentile, but this is the exact middle. In other words, this is the 50th percentile. Here we have this red area. And this area consists of impaired scores. So if you have a score within this red area, it's impaired. This includes actually the low average, which is the 20th percentile, and then borderline impaired, impaired, and severely impaired. So if we take a look at this, we can see here this blue rather, is Gerda's scores on each of these items here. So if you take a look at that, you can see that she scored really, really well. For example, on her verbal information, she scored like at the 95th percentile on vocabulary. Her verbal comprehension is also at 95th percentile. And although she scored on average, for example, on a picture naming, it is much lower than what she would have scored before her dementia. And here's her verbal abstract reasoning, which is still fairly high. And here her ability to copy a figure is in the average range. However, if you look here, you'll see her visual scores are really low. So for example, her perceptual reasoning is really low. It's right down there. Reading a clock face or copying it is way down at the very bottom. Her visual abstract reasoning is low. Visual perception, visual puzzles, and so on. So these are all in this low area right here. And so you can see there's a large discrepancy in her superior ability on the verbal side, which is on the top here, versus her impaired state of mind with the visual components here. And this sort of gives you a very good idea of why you can talk to Gerda and reason with her verbally, and she seems wonderful. But if you start looking at some of the other aspects of her abilities, you'll see where she struggles so much. So I'm going to take a look at another chart. This is the second chart. Once again, this is the pre-morbid score. In other words, where Gerda would have scored before her dementia at the 90th percentile. This is the average. And this is impaired. So in this particular graph, she has not done very well. This graph includes the tests that measure attention, working memory, processing speed, and motor function, all those items at the top there. And you can see that, her working memory index, this blue over here, if you remember, is Gerda's score. Okay, so she's scoring way in the impaired area, in fact, low in the impaired area. So here's her mental calculations, way down at the very bottom. Her fine motor capability, both dominant and non-dominant. This just shows that, for example, in these items, which are in fact many of the things that we use every day in order to just live, she scores very, very low in the impaired range. And this sort of impacts her and causes her anxiety on a day-to-day basis. Whereas in the previous graph, if you looked at that, it shows you that from a verbal perspective, she can perform really well for some of the components. So I think these graphs give you a good idea of how varied the damage to Gerda's brain is. And I think this is the same for everybody with dementia. They might be really good in one area or undamaged and really bad or damaged in another area.